What if I told you that a single rejection letter could expose an entire system of injustice? What if one high school student's fight for education became a battle that shook the foundations of an entire town? 1994, Maplewood, Oregon. A town where the past still lingers in the present. A place where rules are followed, but justice isn't always served. When Isabel Carter, a bright and promising student, is denied admission to West Haven High School, the reason isn't written in ink, but it's understood by everyone. Her rejection sparks a legal battle that reaches beyond a single student. It uncovers a history of exclusion, corruption, and the silent forces that have shaped Maplewood for generations. At the heart of it all is Clara Reed, a 15-year-old girl who never intended to be part of this fight. But as the trial unfolds, she finds herself drawn deeper, questioning everything she thought she knew about her town, her family, and the people who hold power. What starts as a case of school admission quickly spirals into something far greater. A courtroom showdown that could change everything. And as the truth comes to light, one question remains: will justice prevail, or will history repeat itself? The air felt heavier than usual. A storm was brewing over Maplewood Courthouse, Oregon. Thick, gray clouds loomed above the grand stone building, casting long shadows over the courthouse steps. Clara Reed stood at the bottom of those steps, her heart pounding against her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be here. 15 years old, a high school student. Just another girl in a town where people like her were told to stay quiet. But here she was, staring at the towering entrance of the courthouse. Knowing that what was happening inside could change everything, she tightened her grip on the case file she had stolen from her father's desk the night before. Pages filled with cold, legal jargon. Words that shouldn't mean much. But to one girl, they meant everything. Isabel Carter. She had dreamed of walking through the doors of West Haven High School, just like every other kid in town. But the school board had made sure she never got the chance. They had called it a matter of policy. They had called it a misunderstanding. But Clara knew the truth. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't about policy. It was about who Isabel was. And now, the entire town was watching as this case unfolded. A simple school rejection had escalated into a legal battle so fierce, so relentless, that it had reached the highest court in the state. Newspapers called it the case that could change America. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing. Lawyers in dark suits moved like shadows, whispering behind thick folders. Inside that courtroom, a battle was about to begin. A battle that would expose the ugliest secrets of their town. A battle that would prove whether justice was still alive in Maplewood. Clara took a deep breath and climbed the steps, one by one, towards the doors of the courthouse. She wasn't sure what she would find inside, but she knew one thing: the truth was waiting, and this time, it wouldn't stay buried. The courtroom smelled of old wood and ink-stained paper. 100 whispers floated through the air, conversations spoken in hushed, urgent tones. Lawyers shuffled their documents, reporters scribbled notes, and onlookers leaned in, eager to witness history unfold. Somewhere among them sat Clara Reed, 15 years old, too young to be here, too young to understand the weight of what was happening, or at least that's what they all thought. But Clara had been watching, listening, reading between the lines of every hushed conversation her father thought she wouldn't understand. Benjamin Reed wasn't just any lawyer. He was the kind of man who took cases no one else dared to touch. A civil rights attorney who spent his career fighting battles he was never meant to win. And this case, Carter v. West Haven School District, was the kind of case that could ruin him. It had started like any other school rejection. A simple letter, a neatly typed explanation. "We regret to inform you." They said Isabel Carter wasn't the right fit for West Haven High School. But no one believed that. West Haven was the school. The kind of place that opened doors to Ivy League colleges, prestigious careers, a future filled with opportunity. And Isabel? She was exactly the kind of student they should have welcomed. Straight A's, a perfect disciplinary record, a recommendation from one of the most respected teachers in town. But instead of a classroom seat, she got a rejection letter. And when her mother asked why, she got silence. Then excuses. Then a quiet suggestion. Maybe Isabel would be more comfortable somewhere else. The words never said aloud but understood by everyone. West Haven had never accepted a black student before. And they weren't about to start now. The school board had tried to bury the story, dismissing it as a misunderstanding. But Benjamin Reed had dug deeper. And the deeper he dug, the uglier the truth became. Hidden behind the school's polished reputation were powerful people, men in dark suits. Men with old money, men who had built this town on exclusion. People who had spent decades making sure that places like West Haven stayed exactly the way they wanted. Now, those same people were sitting in this courtroom, watching, waiting, ensuring that things went their way. Clara wasn't supposed to know any of this. She was supposed to be in school, studying algebra, reading classic novels, worrying about her next history test. Instead, she was here, staring at Isabel Carter, the girl at the center of it all. A girl who should have been worried about homecoming and final exams. A girl who instead was about to step into a courtroom to fight for the right to learn. The weight of it settled on Clara's chest, and for the first time, she understood. This wasn't just about Isabel. This was about all of them. About every student who had ever been told they didn't belong. About the kind of town Maplewood really was. And about whether anyone here was brave enough to change it. The name Isabel Carter wasn't just another student on a waiting list. It was a name that carried weight. A name that some people in Maplewood wanted to forget. Clara didn't know much about Isabel at first. Just whispers. Just fragments of conversations. She should have gotten in. Everyone knows that. Straight A's. Honor roll. And they still rejected her? Well, you know who her parents are. That last one stuck with Clara. Because in Maplewood, who your parents were mattered. So she started digging. And what she found was more than just a rejected application. It was a history. A battle. A warning. Years ago, Isabel's family had taken on the wrong people. Her father, Michael Carter, had filed a lawsuit against a high-ranking city official. Someone with power. Someone who wasn't used to being challenged. The case? Racial discrimination. Michael Carter had worked for the city, a respected engineer. Until one day, he wasn't. Demoted. Then fired. No official reason. Just vague explanations. Shifting paperwork. Closed doors. So he fought back. He took it to court. And he lost. The trial had been fast, quiet, swept away before it could make headlines. But the people in power? They never forgot. And now, years later, his daughter, brilliant, hardworking, with a future ahead of her, wasn't going to West Haven High. There was no official reason, no academic shortcoming, just a rejection letter and an unspoken message. You don't belong here. Clara felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about a school anymore. It was about power and the people who would do anything to keep it. The Maplewood Public Library was quiet that afternoon. The kind of quiet that only old books and dim lighting could create. Clara sat at a wooden table, a stack of admissions records spread out in front of her. The West Haven High enrollment list. Officially, it wasn't something students could just access. But Clara had a talent for blending in. For walking into places with just enough confidence that no one questioned whether she was supposed to be there. And right now, no one was watching. Her eyes scanned the names, flipping through files, cross-referencing dates and grades. Then, she saw it. Something that didn't make sense. A student, Jason Fuller. See average grades. Accepted. Another, Megan Thompson. Barely passing math. Accepted. And then another. And another. All of them. Lower GPAs than Isabel Carter. All of them. White. Clara's hands tightened around the papers. This wasn't about qualifications. It had never been. Her heart pounded as she kept reading, searching for something, anything, that could explain it. Then, at the bottom of one of the documents, she found something different. A single name. Small. Almost an afterthought. Edward Langley. She didn't recognize it, but something about the way it was listed, under a special category, connected to multiple accepted students, made her stomach twist. A connection. A pattern. Whoever Edward Langley was, he wasn't just another name on a list. And Clara had a feeling that if she found out who he was, she'd find out the truth about West Haven High. Clara sat quietly in the corner of the local library, her fingers brushing through the yellowed pages of old enrollment records. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper, and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above was the only sound that accompanied her thoughts. She had been here for hours, searching through documents, trying to piece together the mystery surrounding Isabel's rejection. The more she dug, the more questions arose. Isabel Carter was undeniably qualified. Her grades were excellent, her extracurricular activities were impressive, and her recommendations were glowing. Yet, despite all of that, she had been rejected from West Haven High. It made no sense. Clara carefully laid out the folder she had found in front of her. It was an old admissions packet from the previous year. At first, the document seemed like nothing more than routine paperwork. But as Clara flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowed. There were inconsistencies, glaring inconsistencies. Some applicants with far lower GPAs than Isabel's had been accepted without any issues. One in particular caught her eye, a student named Lucy Anderson. Lucy's academic record was average at best. Her extracurriculars were sparse, and she lacked any notable achievements. Yet, she had been admitted to West Haven without a second thought. Clara's heart started to race as she compared Lucy's file with Isabel's. The disparities were too much to ignore. Something wasn't adding up. She dug deeper, cross-referencing the years and the names. There were other students, too. Students with far less impressive records than Isabel, who had been granted entry into the school. One by one, Clara saw the pattern. Every one of these students had some connection, whether it was through their family's wealth, political influence, or long-standing relationships with the school's administration. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. But Clara wasn't done yet. She knew she needed more. She needed to find the root of the problem. She reached for a new folder, one that contained the most recent enrollment data, and began scanning it carefully. It didn't take long before she found what she was looking for, a list of applicants who had been denied entry. Along with their reasons for rejection, Clara's eyes skimmed the list, and there, toward the bottom of the page, was Isabel's name. Next to it, the reason for her rejection was written in bold letters: insufficient diversity. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Insufficient diversity? It was a code, a discriminatory code that had been used to justify rejecting students like Isabel, who didn't fit the mold that the administration desired. But what made it even worse was that Isabel was being punished for something beyond her control: her race, her background, and the fact that the school was playing a game of politics with students' futures. The realization hit Clara like a ton of bricks. This was bigger than she had initially thought. It wasn't just about Isabel's rejection. It was about a system that systematically excluded qualified students based on their race, background, or family connections. And now, Clara had the evidence to prove it. But Clara knew that revealing this information would not be easy. She needed to be careful. She needed to ensure that she could expose the truth without putting herself or Isabel in harm's way. The weight of what she was carrying pressed down on her, but there was no turning back now. As she closed the folder, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about Isabel anymore. This was about every student who had been overlooked, dismissed, or rejected because of a biased system. Clara couldn't let this injustice go unnoticed. She was going to fight for Isabel, for every student who deserved a fair chance, and for the truth that needed to come to light. Clara gathered her things and stood up, her mind racing with the steps she needed to take next. It wasn't just a matter of confronting the school. No, it was bigger than that. This was a fight against an institution that had been built on privilege and power. Clara knew the battle ahead would be long and hard, but she wasn't about to back down. With determination in her eyes, Clara made her way out of the library, ready to confront the corruption she had uncovered. The truth would come out, no matter the cost. Clara sat in her history class, but her mind was elsewhere. The evidence she had uncovered the day before was still fresh in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about the documents, the clear proof of the school's discriminatory practices. But as much as she wanted to act on it, she knew that doing so would come at a cost. The pressure was already beginning to mount, and it wasn't long before she would face the consequences. Her teacher, Mr. Reynolds, called on her to answer a question, but Clara's mind was a million miles away. When she finally looked up, she could see the disapproval in his eyes. He had always been a stern, no-nonsense teacher, but today, his gaze seemed colder, more pointed. After class, Clara gathered her things, but Mr. Reynolds stopped her in the doorway. "Clara, I need to speak with you for a moment," he said, his voice low, but firm. Clara followed him to the side of the classroom, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the tension hanging thick between them. "Look," he began, his voice lowering even further, "I don't know what you're involved in, but I strongly advise you to stay out of it. This school has its ways, and trust me, you don't want to go against it." Clara stared at him, confusion and frustration building inside her. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Mr. Reynolds replied, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I've heard whispers. The administration isn't happy with what you're digging into. You need to stop before this gets out of hand. This is not a battle you can win." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had known this moment was coming. The system was already fighting back, but she wasn't about to back down. "I'm not going to stop," Clara said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm doing the right thing." Mr. Reynolds sighed, shaking his head. "You don't understand. There are forces at work here that you have no idea about. You're playing with fire, Clara. I don't want to see you get burned." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the hallway, her thoughts swirling. She could feel the pressure building, the walls closing in on her, but she couldn't stop now. Isabel's case, and the truth, were more important than anything else. That evening, Clara returned home to find an envelope on the kitchen table. It was plain, with no return address, and it had been slipped under the door. She hesitated for a moment, then tore open the envelope. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper with a few short words typed in bold font: "Stop now, or else." Her hands shook as she read the words again. It was a threat, A clear warning to back off. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Whoever had sent this letter knew exactly what she was doing, and they weren't afraid to use intimidation to stop her. But Clara wasn't afraid. The more the pressure mounted, the more determined she became. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions. As she crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash, Clara knew one thing for certain. She was not backing down. The truth was too important, and no matter how many warnings or threats she received, she would keep fighting. She couldn't be silenced. The following days were tense. Clara had tried to focus on her studies, but her mind kept drifting back to the injustice she was uncovering. The pressure was mounting, not just from the school, but from the unseen forces pushing back against her. The anonymous letter was still fresh in her mind. She knew she wasn't just fighting the school anymore. This was bigger than Isabel's rejection. This was a fight against a system entrenched in power, privilege, and corruption. One evening, as Clara sat at the kitchen table, she was startled by the sound of the front door opening. Her father, Benjamin Reed, stepped inside, his face tense with concern. Clara looked up from her homework, trying to hide the worry in her eyes. But her father could always tell when something was bothering her. "Clara, we need to talk," Benjamin said, his voice firm yet gentle. Clara hesitated, knowing that the conversation was coming. Her father had always been her rock, a man who stood up for what was right no matter the cost. He was a lawyer, specializing in civil rights cases, and he had spent years fighting for justice in a world that often seemed stacked against people like them. "What's wrong, Dad?" Clara asked, trying to sound casual, but she knew he could see through her facade. Benjamin sat down across from her, his brow furrowed. "I've been hearing rumors, Clara. There are whispers about you poking around in things that the school doesn't want touched. You need to be careful. This is bigger than you think." Clara felt her heart race. "I have to do this, Dad. Isabel's being treated unfairly. I found proof. Documents that show the school is discriminating against certain students." Benjamin's expression softened, but his concern didn't fade. "I know you want to help Isabel, and I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right, but I've seen enough of these battles to know when things are bigger than they seem. Sometimes, these systems, these institutions, they don't just fight back with words. They fight back with everything they have." Clara met his gaze. "I'm not backing down." Her father sighed, rubbing his temples as if he were trying to find a way to protect her without holding her back. "Let me take a look at what you've found. Maybe I can find something that will help us, something that gives us more leverage." Clara handed him the folder she had brought home from the library, feeling the weight of the documents in her hands as she watched him carefully go through them. He was meticulous, his trained eyes scanning each page, reading the annotations Clara had made, and connecting the dots she had left. After a few moments, Benjamin set the papers down, his expression shifting from concern to something deeper, something that Clara couldn't quite place. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as he processed the information. This is serious, Clara," he said quietly. "You were right to dig deeper, but I don't think you fully understand just how deep this goes. These aren't just isolated cases of discrimination. These documents, they point to a pattern, an organized effort to selectively admit or deny students based on factors that have nothing to do with their qualifications." Clara's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" Benjamin's voice grew more serious. "This is more than just the school playing favorites or even just racial discrimination. This looks like a systematic effort to protect certain interests, political, financial. Someone with influence is using the school as a pawn in a much larger game. These files," he paused, then looked directly at Clara. "They've been carefully managed. Whoever's behind this is covering their tracks, but they're leaving clues." Clara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. It was worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just about a few students being wronged. It was about a larger conspiracy, one that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Her father leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "We need to dig deeper. This could go all the way to the top." Clara looked at her father, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known that what she was up against was powerful, but hearing her father say it out loud made it feel all the more real. "I can't stop now," Clara said, determination in her voice. "If this is as big as you think it is, then we have to expose it. For Isabel, for everyone." Benjamin stared at her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "You're right, but this is going to be dangerous. We need to be careful, very careful." He stood up and began to pace, deep in thought. "We'll start by getting access to more files, more documents. If we can find a paper trail, something concrete, it will be harder for them to deny what's going on. We'll need to cover our tracks, make sure no one knows we're digging too deep." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes." Her father gave her a stern but proud look. "I know you will. Just remember, This fight isn't just about one student or one school anymore. We're taking on a system that has been in place for far too long. As Clara watched her father carefully collect the documents, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything. She wasn't just uncovering a conspiracy within a school. She was uncovering a corrupt system that had been operating under the radar for far too long. And now, with her father's help, they were going to bring it to light, no matter the cost. As Clara and her father continued to dig deeper into the school's practices, they hit a dead end. Every document seemed to confirm their worst fears. There was something far more sinister going on behind the scenes, but the paper trail was sparse. It felt as though they were being blocked at every turn, and their search for concrete evidence became increasingly frustrating. Then, one afternoon, a breakthrough came unexpectedly. A former school employee, someone Clara had never met but had heard of from rumors, reached out. Her name was Lisa Warren. She had worked as an administrative assistant at the school for several years before quitting abruptly, citing personal reasons that no one could quite pinpoint. Lisa had been silent about the school's inner workings, but now, something had changed. She was willing to talk. Clara and her father arranged to meet Lisa in a small cafe on the outskirts of Brookhaven. When she arrived, Lisa was a middle-aged woman, her tired eyes betraying the weight of years spent keeping secrets. She sat across from them, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her coffee. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," Lisa began, her voice low, almost fearful. "I wasn't going to get involved. I thought it would be safer to forget everything. But what's happening to Isabel? That's just the tip of the iceberg." Clara leaned forward, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated, looking over her shoulder as if ensuring no one was listening. The pressure to reject Isabel, it didn't come from the admissions office. It came from higher up, from people with more power. There was talk of keeping certain students out, students who might cause problems, students who might be too outspoken. Clara's father raised an eyebrow. "Who gave those orders?" Lisa's eyes flickered nervously. "I can't name names, but I can tell you this much. It wasn't just about race. Isabel's family had connections, and they were considered a threat. They were worried she would expose things they didn't want to get out." Clara's mind raced. This was confirmation. Isabel wasn't just a victim of random discrimination. There was a concerted effort to keep her, and others like her, out of the school. But why? Who was behind it all? Clara pressed, her voice steady but urgent. Lisa looked down at her coffee, her hands shaking. "It wasn't just the school. It's bigger. There's a group in the city, a powerful organization that has its fingers in everything. The school was just one piece of their game. They wanted to make sure that the people they considered troublemakers, people like Isabel, were kept in their place." Clara felt her breath catch. A powerful organization? Was this the same group that had been behind the manipulation of the school's admission process? Lisa looked up at them, fear in her eyes. "I don't know how deep it goes, but I know this. Isabel was seen as a threat, and they would stop at nothing to make sure she didn't get in. She might not even realize how dangerous it is for her now that she's become involved." Clara nodded, a feeling of dread settling in her stomach. The more she learned, the more it seemed like Isabel's fight was just a small part of something much bigger. The more Clara and her father dug, the clearer it became. The school's discriminatory practices were not isolated incidents. It wasn't just about the rejection of a few deserving students. It was part of a deliberate, orchestrated effort to maintain a certain power structure in Brookhaven. The truth was far darker than they had imagined. Through Lisa's testimony and their own research, they uncovered startling evidence that the school was under the control of a powerful, shadowy organization in the city. This group, with its wide-reaching influence, had its hands in various aspects of life in Brookhaven, from politics to business to education. It wasn't just about keeping certain students out of West Haven. It was about maintaining control over the city's future, shaping it according to their own agenda. Benjamin Reed pored over the new evidence, his brow furrowed as he connected the dots. "This isn't just about a few people with a bias," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. "This is a calculated effort to control who gets power and who doesn't. They're using the school as a tool to ensure that only certain people get the opportunities to succeed." Clara felt a knot tighten in her chest. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. The school, the city, it was all part of a larger game. One where people like Isabel were nothing more than pawns. But they were not the only ones being played. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that Isabel's rejection was just a small part of the organization's broader plan. The group had its sights on keeping anyone who could challenge the status quo in check, people like Isabel, who could bring light to their corruption, their lies. The biggest shock came when they discovered that the organization had been intentionally blocking access to records, ensuring that any student with the potential to disrupt the balance was removed from the system. Isabel, with her intelligence and connections, was considered a threat to their carefully constructed world. They feared that if she gained admission to the school, it would expose their network, unravel their secrets. Clara's father looked at the documents with a grim expression. They're scared of her, Clara. Isabel could be the key to bringing everything down. If she's allowed in, if she speaks out, they're terrified of what she could reveal. They're doing everything they can to stop her from getting in. But this isn't just about her anymore. This is about exposing the entire system. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. Isabel wasn't just fighting for a spot at West Haven High anymore. She was fighting against a system that had been manipulating and controlling the city for years. And if she succeeded, everything could change. Her mind raced. We need to protect her, Dad. We need to make sure she knows the danger she's in. Benjamin nodded, his face hardening. And we need to take this fight public. The longer we wait, the more control they'll have. It's time to bring it into the light. As Clara looked out the window, the weight of everything they had uncovered pressed down on her. They were about to take on the most powerful people in Brookhaven. But one thing was certain, they weren't backing down now. With the weight of everything they had uncovered, Benjamin Reed knew that there was no turning back. It wasn't just a matter of Isabel's right to attend West Haven High anymore. It was about exposing a corrupt system that had been operating under the radar for far too long. Armed with the evidence they had gathered, documents, testimonies, and proof of the school's deliberate discriminatory practices, Benjamin filed the case, bringing it to court with the fervor of a man who had uncovered the truth and was ready to fight for it. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Clara, standing by her father's side, could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't just a regular case. It was a battle against a powerful system that had controlled Brookhaven for years. The other side, however, wasn't going to give up without a fight. The school's legal team was well prepared, confident that they could dismiss the case with ease. They had been operating with impunity for years, and they weren't about to let a single student and her family threaten their empire. Benjamin stood up in front of the judge, his voice calm but firm. He presented the case methodically, highlighting the discrimination Isabel had faced, pointing out the glaring inconsistencies in the school's admissions process, and laying out the undeniable proof of the influence of the shadowy organization behind the scenes. The evidence was damning. There was no question that the school had deliberately kept Isabel out based on biased, unjust criteria. The defense, led by a well-known lawyer with ties to the city's elite, quickly began to mount their counter-arguments. They dismissed the documents as fabricated, claiming that there was no conspiracy and that Isabel's rejection was simply the result of standard admissions procedures. But every argument they made felt hollow in the face of the truth that Benjamin presented. The more they tried to cover up, the more the cracks in their defense became apparent. Clara could feel the weight of the courtroom's gaze. They were on trial, too. Every word they spoke, every piece of evidence they presented, was scrutinized by the judge, by the jury, by the school's powerful backers in the shadows. But Clara knew they were doing the right thing. She had seen the pain Isabel had endured, and she had witnessed the injustice firsthand. This battle was about more than just one girl's education. It was about bringing down the corrupt forces that had taken control of their city. As the session adjourned for the day, Clara and her father exchanged glances. They knew that this was just the beginning. The real fight was yet to come. The school would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, and the forces behind the scenes wouldn't let this case disrupt their hold on the city. But Clara was more determined than ever. They had the truth on their side, and that was more powerful than anything the school or its backers could throw at them. The next few days were a blur of motion. Court hearings, arguments, rebuttals, each one more intense than the last. The stakes had never been higher, and Clara could feel the pressure mounting with each passing moment. As the case proceeded, it became clear that the legal battle was not just about what had happened to Isabel. It was about something much larger. The fight for justice in a city that had been corrupted by years of powerful influence and hidden agendas. Benjamin Reed stood at the center of it all, his mind racing as he prepared for the next round of the courtroom showdown. The school's defense team was pulling out all the stops, using every legal loophole they could find. Every tactic they had learned from years of defending the powerful. But Benjamin wasn't backing down. He knew that exposing the truth wasn't just about winning this case. It was about exposing the rot at the heart of Brookhaven. The tension reached a boiling point during one of the most heated exchanges in the courtroom. Clara watched as her father and the defense attorney went head-to-head, their voices rising as they argued over the interpretation of the evidence. Benjamin's calm, calculated approach contrasted with the defense lawyer's increasingly frantic tone. It was clear that the opposition was starting to crack under the pressure. They had underestimated the Reed family's determination, and now they were beginning to feel the heat. But just as things seemed to be swinging in their favor, an unexpected interruption came. A representative from the organization that had secretly controlled the school's decisions appeared in the courtroom. Clara recognized the man immediately. He was a well-known figure in the city. A man with connections to the mayor, to the police, and to nearly every major business in Brookhaven. His presence in the courtroom was a clear signal that the forces behind the scenes weren't just watching. They were preparing to act. The judge, who had been relatively neutral up until this point, suddenly seemed to shift in his demeanor. Clara could see the subtle change in his posture, the way his eyes flicked toward the representative as if seeking approval. It wasn't hard to tell that the higher powers were trying to influence the outcome of the case. Clara's stomach churned as she realized the true magnitude of the battle they were facing. The defense team seized on this moment of tension, launching a full-scale attack on the credibility of their evidence, trying to convince the jury that the case was based on false assumptions and that there was no real proof of any conspiracy. They claimed that Isabel's rejection had been purely administrative. Nothing more, nothing less. But the more they spoke, the more they seemed desperate to cover up the truth. Benjamin stood tall, his voice unwavering as he turned the tables on the defense. He called for the jury to see beyond the smoke and mirrors of the school's defense, to look at the facts, the real evidence that had been presented. He asked them to consider what kind of system would deliberately keep a student like Isabel out, not because of her abilities, but because of the fear she represented. The courtroom fell silent as the jury deliberated. Clara held her breath, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. Would they win? Would justice be served? Or would the powerful forces behind the scenes succeed in silencing the truth once again? As the final moments of the trial approached, the tension in the room was unbearable. The forces working to protect the status quo were pulling every string they could. But Clara and her father had something they couldn't take away, the truth. And that was a power no one could silence. In the end, it wasn't just about what would happen in the courtroom. It was about the fight for something much bigger. The fight for justice, for truth. And for the people who had been silenced for far too long. As the courtroom drama unfolded, an unexpected twist emerged. Just when it seemed like the school's defense was beginning to regain some ground, a member of the school board decided to step forward. The tension in the room thickened as this new witness, someone who had long remained silent behind the scenes, made their decision to break their silence. This individual, once a key player in the institution, had a powerful story to tell. They spoke of internal meetings, of secret discussions held behind closed doors, where decisions about admissions were not made based on merit, but on influence and bias. They confirmed what Clara and her father had suspected all along. Isabel had been deliberately rejected not because of her abilities or her qualifications, but because of her race. The moment this person took the stand, the case shifted entirely. The credibility of the school's defense crumbled as the witness's testimony painted a damning picture of the systemic racism that had been operating within the school for years. Their testimony was the smoking gun that Benjamin Reed had been waiting for. The jury, the judge, and even the defense team sat in stunned silence as the truth was laid bare for all to see. The defense, once so confident, had no response. The case, which had seemed like an uphill battle for Clara and her father, was now clearly in their favor. The day of the final ruling arrived, and Clara felt a heavy weight in her chest as she sat in the courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that this case was about more than just one student. It was about a fight for justice that had the power to affect the entire country. The judge, who had remained somewhat neutral throughout the trial, now seemed to be carefully weighing the evidence. And then, the moment came. The judge's gavel struck, and the ruling was made. Isabel Carter had won the case. The court recognized that the rejection of Isabel was not just a personal failure, but a systemic issue that had to be addressed. The ruling established an important legal precedent in civil rights law, one that would influence how future cases of discrimination in schools were handled. For Clara, for Isabel, and for everyone who had fought alongside them, it was a victory not just in the courtroom, but in the broader fight for equality. The victory was bittersweet. However, as the school's defense collapsed, those responsible for the discriminatory actions did not escape unscathed. An investigation into the school board members began immediately. Some individuals were forced to step down from their positions, while others faced legal consequences for their involvement in the corruption. The ripple effect was felt throughout the community as the truth continued to unfold. It wasn't just a school that had been exposed. It was an entire system of injustice that had been operating for far too long. For Clara, the realization hit hard. Even though they had won the case, she knew that the fight for justice was far from over. While the legal system had made a breakthrough, the deeper issue of corruption, bias, and discrimination still loomed large in Brookhaven. The victory was a step in the right direction, But it was only a small part of a much larger battle. Clara understood that justice, though powerful, could easily be manipulated, distorted, and corrupted. But as long as there were people like her father, people willing to stand up and fight for what was right, there was hope. And as the courtroom cleared, Clara's thoughts turned to a final, haunting question that lingered in her mind. What if no one had spoken out? What if they had stayed silent, content to let the system continue its unjust practices? Would this case have been forgotten? Would Isabel's fight for equality have been swept under the rug, just like so many others before it? The question hung in the air as Clara and her father walked out of the courtroom, their heads held high. But the fight was far from over. The case had been a victory, but it was only one battle in a war that still needed to be fought. Clara's voice was just one in the growing chorus demanding change. And she knew that as long as people like her kept standing up, the fight for justice would continue. The message was clear. If society did not hold its leaders accountable, if it allowed injustices to go unchecked, then no one would be safe. But if enough people dared to speak out, if enough people were willing to fight for what was right, then change could happen. The world was not perfect, but it could be made better through the collective effort of those who refused to accept the status quo. And with that, Clara knew one thing for sure. She would continue to fight, continue to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. For Isabel, for herself, for everyone who had ever been silenced, the fight for justice would never stop.